Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Who does America belong to? Does it belong to you or does it belong to the world? Who should have a right to move here, and do those people have an obligation to assimilate into the culture already present? Well, Univision anchor Jorge Ramos will be here to debate the answers to those questions and more in just a minute. Also, these are very strange days here in Washington, some of the strangest we've ever seen. Republicans had 7 years to agree on an Obamacare replacement, yet they're already squabbling over the bill they just revealed yesterday. Despite controlling the whole government, they've done very little to implement President Trump's agenda. Why is that? Well, we're going to speak to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan. He should explain what is going on and why Congress seems not to be focused, or maybe they are. But first, a day without a woman. Thousands of women skipped work today and instead participated in marches and other events they described as feminist. The official Twitter account for the Women's March on Washington in January proudly tweeted that women birth half the population.
A day without a woman is a day without me. Shut it down!
We know our value, and we know that America doesn't function without us.
When women succeed, the world succeeds.
Well, our first guest is the executive editor of Bustle.com, a women's website that shut down today to show solidarity with women. Julie Alvin joins us now. Julie, thanks for coming on.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So I just heard that woman say at the march, women have value and America doesn't function without them, and I think every person agrees with that. And the species dies actually without them. I completely agree, and I think I understand this march to be an attempt to show that women have value and are impressive, something that obviously I agree with. But if you want to show that you're impressive, shouldn't you do something impressive, like, I don't know, cure a disease or fix the debt crisis or do a really good job at work? Taking the day off is not impressive. Anyone can do it. How does this make the point exactly?
Well, I think that, the point of this is to show the impact that women have on the economy and that women have, in the workplace. And one of the best ways to do that is to show what it would be like if women were not present, if women were absent. I also think that, this wasn't a day where women were sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Bustle, right, in particular, really encouraged readers and encouraged our staff to take the day to spend time volunteering for women in marginalized communities, for women who are underprivileged, for women who are unable to strike today. We encourage women to call the representatives. We encourage women to donate to causes that support women. And, this wasn't a day, of fun. This was a day of action. And it was a day, right, of specifically serving women and serving the needs of women in the interest of, supporting women's equality. So right, I think all those things are very impressive.
I mean, I can see that. But if the point is to show that women are needed in the workplace, and obviously they are, women prepared the show that you're watching right now, then why not do like an extra good job at work to show you're valuable at work? If you want to show people, boy, you couldn't live without me, then act in a way that makes them think that.
I think that protests and strikes historically have been a way to show the impact that people have on certain workplaces and certain environments by being absent and by showing, if you're not going to value me as much as you should, if you're not going to pay me equally, if you're not going to, protect me from sexual harassment in the workplace, if you're not going to offer me paid leave, this is what it would be like if I did not participate in this economy in general. And sometimes the greatest way to show impact is to show absence. And I think that this is actually more effective than you're giving it credit for. And, strikes historically have been enormously effective in showing the value of the people who are striking.
Yeah, I mean, some have, some haven't, but the ones that have a very specific set of demands tend to succeed, and the ones that are amorphous tend not to succeed. So I went on the website, Day Without a Woman, to try and figure out what this is about. And one of the things I learned is that you're supposed to avoid shopping except at women and minority-owned businesses. In other words, if the business is owned by a white man, you can't shop there. You shouldn't shop there. Why the hostility toward white men? What do they have to? Why white men exactly?
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily hostility towards white men. I think it's more about being supportive towards women and towards minorities who are historically disenfranchised in this country, who are paid less, who are not treated as well in the workforce, who don't have stability in the workforce. So I don't think that this is about punishing white men. I think that it is about supporting women and people of color.
Well, sure. If you're boycotting white men, it's obviously an attack on white men. But that's not true, actually. So if you look at household median income, the top 3 slots are not white men. They're all people of color. I think the number 1 is Indians, and number 2 is Taiwanese, and the third is, I think, Filipino. So actually, white men are not making the most money in this country. I don't know if you've checked the numbers. So it's a little bit weird to say boycott white businesses, white male-owned businesses, when they're not the most successful? What is that about?
I think that if you were to look at the statistics, it is largely white men that are positions of power, as far as CEOs, as far as people in, power at various businesses, as far as people who hold the majority of leadership positions, who hold the majority of CEO positions for Fortune 500 companies. So, traditionally and historically and factually today, white men are in better positions when it comes to, workplace equality than.
But that's not actually true. I mean, historically, yeah, I think that's right. But if you want to speak historically, so the Department of Labor ranks this by ethnicity, and historically it was a country settled by British settlers. So if you run down the list, British Americans, English Americans, are number 41 for income. I'm not saying, white people aren't successful. They are, but it's much more complicated than that. And so why not acknowledge that, I guess?
I think that we're kind of getting off of the point here, Tucker. I think that the point of today is about women's equality, and if we're talking about if we're talking about where women stand in today's economy, the U.S. is 28th best as far as gender equality goes in the world. They're 60th best as far as gender empowerment goes for women in the world. So, maybe I can appeal to your patriotism on this point. I don't want the U.S. to be 60th best in anything, or 28th best in anything.
Well,
I want us to be the best at this.
It depends what the measurements are. I mean, come on.
Well, anything depends what the measurements are. These are from the World Economic Forum, is the statistics that I'm stating.
But what does that even mean? But I'll throw it out for you that I think is interesting. So for younger women entering the workplace, there was a recent survey done in the 150 biggest cities in the United States, and in 148 of them, young women in their 20s entering the workforce made more than their peers, their male peers. So things are changing. I mean, boys graduate from high school at lower rates, from college at lower rates, and young men, unmarried, childless young men, make less in cities than comparable women. So, that's good. You should be happy about it, right?
Well, I think that there's absolutely progress being made. I will not deny that at all. Those are things that I'm very excited about.
Were you
I
aware
think if you
of
were
that?
to look, I was aware of that. And I think that if you look at, the Pew Research studies, they actually say that while the gender pay gap is smaller, it's 93 to 100, it's still there. And I think that another thing that's an important point here is the fact that, women typically encounter these sort of reductions in their access to higher paying positions and leadership roles at later stages in their career. So while they may start out equally.
Can I say one thing? Okay, I know. But look, here's just the bottom line for me. I don't have a lot of time. I just want to get your reaction. All the women in my life, and I live with 4 of them, they're powerful. And the presupposition behind what you're doing is that women are weak, they're victims, they're put upon by men. That's not the experience of the women who I know.
I don't think that we are saying that we are weak. I think that we're showing our strength today, and we're showing our strength in standing up for, women's equality in general, and standing up for women who are not lucky enough to be able to strike today, and standing up for women. It's International Women's Day. There are 62 million girls worldwide who don't have access to education. We're standing up for all women, and so, I love to hear that the women in your life are strong, empowered women, and that you respect them. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that might not be the case in all households, and that's certainly not the case in all countries.
Julie, thanks a lot for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump says he remains committed to his agenda of building a wall along the southern border and restricting immigration into this country. Just today, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked whether the president's insistence on a wall could imperil American security by getting an anti-American candidate elected in Mexico. Here's how he replied.
This is a national security issue, something that, frankly, when he's discussed this with President Peña Nieto of Mexico, that there is a shared concern about drug cartels, drug trafficking, arms sales over the border. There is a shared concern for the respect of the border, because it means a lot to both sides.
Whatever you think of President Trump's efforts, they may be supported by a majority of the public, a thin one, but still. For instance, a recent AP poll found that 52% of Americans believe the risks of admitting refugees outweigh the benefits, and arrivals should be restricted accordingly. Jorge Ramos is an anchor for Univision and one of the president's loudest critics on immigration. He joins us tonight from Miami. Jorge, thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So at an event several weeks ago in February, you said this, and I wanted to ask you about it, and I'm quoting you. I'm a proud Latino immigrant here in the United States. You know exactly what is going on here in the U.S. There are many people who do not want us to be here and who want to create a wall in order to separate us. But you know what? This is also our country. Let me repeat this. Our country, not theirs. It's our country. Who's the us and who's the they? Whose country is it?
This is our country. It is yours. It is mine. And it is ours. The interesting thing is that with the Trump administration and many people who support Donald Trump, they think it is their country, that it is a white country, and they are absolutely wrong. This is not a white country. This is not their country. It is ours, and that's precisely what I'm saying. Look, in 2044, in 2044, this country, the white population will become a minority. It will be a minority-majority country. That's precisely what I'm saying. Latinos, Asians, African Americans, whites. It is our country, Tucker.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me just point out that you are white. Obviously, you're whiter than I am. You've got blue eyes. So, I mean, I don't know exactly what you mean by white or Latino. But let me just ask you again to explain our country, not theirs. Who is they? Whose country is it not?
Well, many people who want to go back to 1965 when there was a white majority. Many people who believe that Latinos and immigrants and refugees shouldn't be here. That's precisely what I was referring to.
So it's not their country?
Before the election,
belong to those people? What are you saying?
Well, it's also their country, but it's not only their country.
Right,
we have to understand that this is a multicultural, multiracial country, and we have to live and be tolerant. And that's exactly what I was referring to.
Well, I certainly agree with that.
Country.
Now, I don't want to bring this to race. You did, so I'm going to follow up on that. You have posited yourself as the leader of Latinos, and I'm not exactly sure what that word means. So Latinos seem to encompass, I don't know, German Guatemalans and Italian Argentines and Afro-Cubans and non-Spanish speaking Peruvians and, I don't know, blue-eyed rich Mexicans like you. What do those groups have in common exactly?
Well, what we have in common is that mostly that we come from a region in the world, Latin America, and there are many differences. Many people call them Latinos, many people call them Hispanics. We tend to speak more Spanish at home than others. We have not only hundreds but thousands of mass media in our own language, in contrast with what happened with Italians or Europeans before us. So in other words, it's a kind of immigration that has a distinct characteristics that others didn't have before.
But what is distinct, again, just to be totally clear, if I am a non-Spanish speaking Brazilian, I speak Portuguese, I'm a non-Spanish speaking Peruvian, I'm 100% German, but I live in Guatemala, and there are a lot of them there, as you know. There are also a lot of 100% Italian people in Argentina. There are a lot of African Latin American Cubans. What do they have in common? A lot of them don't like each other. They don't speak the same language. They have very different cultures. I don't understand why they're under one heading.
It's not really that complicated. It's simply a matter of a country of origin, either for you or for your family. Again, most of us speak Spanish. Most of us come from Latin America. About half the Latino population, adult Latino population, are immigrants. So that's what differentiates us from other groups. But mostly has to do with the country of origin. That's
okay. It still doesn't make any sense to me at all. But as a political matter, it makes a lot of sense because it allows people like you to say, I represent everybody on an entire continent, when clearly that's not true. Well, our conversation with Jorge Ramos continues in just a minute. There's a lot more ahead. Plus, the big push to repeal Obamacare began just 2 days ago, yet it's already in trouble. Talk to Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, to see if the Republican Party's plan can be saved and find out whether Congress plans to act on the rest of President Trump's agenda, which it has not been acting on. Also, one guest who says today's women's marches and others like them expose American liberalism as exhausted, a sham ideology more interested in genitalia-shaped hats than human freedom. It's a fascinating position, and he'll explain it for us just ahead. Welcome back. Here's the second half of our interview with Univision anchor Jorge Ramos, the part where he gives up and admits, I'm right. Just kidding. Watch. Get back to the point that you were making a minute ago, that Americans have no right to be concerned about the dramatic demographic change taking place in their country. Let me just stipulate, I'm for getting along, I'm for colorblindness, I'm for tolerance, 100%. But I also think that if things radically change in your country, it's okay for you to say, what is this? And maybe I don't want to live in a country that looks nothing like the country I grew up in. Is that bigoted? It seems to me in Mexico you'd be allowed to say that.
Well, we have to understand that there's a demographic wave or revolution, if you want to call it, happening right here in the United States. Right now, there are about 60 million Latinos. In about 35 years, there's going to be 100 million Latinos. 1 in 3 is going to be a Latino. So there's a demographic revolution or a Latino revolution going on. Now, on the other hand, if you are implying that there's an invasion to the United States, that is not true.
I'm not saying invasion. I'm merely saying you're name-calling. Wait, you come to this country, you make a ton of money, and then you yell at people who say, well, wait a second. You know, this is having an effect on my kids' school, on my culture, on the economy. And your point is you're not allowed to have that opinion.
Actually, that is not true. It's obviously it's having an impact, but it's having a positive impact.
Yeah, in some ways it is, but not in all ways.
No. And overall, there's an immigration surplus. All immigrants contribute about $2 billion to the economy of the United States. In other words, immigrants contribute and put much more money into the system than what they take out in social services, according to the National Academy of Sciences. In 20 years, it's been $54 billion in input on immigration surplus. So it is a great business to have immigrants in this country.
Those numbers aren't exactly right, but I think some immigrants contribute a lot. Some immigrants contribute a lot.
The National Academy of Sciences, those are the numbers.
It's a little more complicated than that, but I don't want to debate that right now. I just want to make the point that there is a downside as well. There's clearly an upside, and we all recognize, and people like immigrants actually in America, despite your claims. They do. But there's also a downside. 15% of federal inmates, prisoners, are Mexican citizens. So, like, why shouldn't I be allowed to say that's a problem? I don't want criminals here from another country. They're not even citizens.
No, that's precisely the problem, because you, like Donald Trump, are also criminalizing the immigrant population. That is not true.
I'm not criminalizing them. I'm noting a fact of who they are.
It is not true. These are the facts. 97% of undocumented immigrants, 97% are good people. Less than 3% are bad hombres, or they committed a felony, according to the Migration Policy Institute.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
The vast majority, Tucker, are good people. They're not criminals.
I'm not arguing that the vast majority are criminals. Now, their presence here illegally is a crime, and I think we should be honest about that. But most are decent people. I agree, and most Americans agree.
Most of them are.
15% of all federal inmates in America are Mexican citizens. That's not a small number. That's many, 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 many thousands. Doesn't mean they're all bad. It means that's a big number.
I don't know what's your source. I'm giving you my source. My source is
the Migration
Policy Institute.
How's that?
Well, I don't know if that's correct.
So you don't actually know anything about this. So that's my
what I'm saying is that,
you're making generalizations that are not rooted in fact.
This is important thing, Tucker. 3%, less than 3% of undocumented immigrants commit felonies. In contrast, about 6% of Americans commit felonies. In other words, the more immigrants that you have, the more immigrants that you have.
You made that point at the outset. So let me just ask you one last question. We're almost out of time, and you don't have command of these numbers, so it's pointless. But let me ask you this, a theoretical question. What immigration restrictions would you favor in Mexico? It's already a felony to be there illegally, but what further restrictions in the country of Mexico, the country of your birth, would you favor?
Mexico is a terrible example for the protection of immigrants. Mexico treats Central American immigrants in a terrible way. So I wouldn't put Mexico as an example. I think countries should be judged by the way they treat the most vulnerable, not the most powerful. And Mexico is doing a horrible job when it comes to human rights and when it comes to treating Central Americans. On the other hand, here in the United States, I think we have the responsibility to treat immigrants in a decent, in a humane way. We are responsible partly because of that. They come here, undocumented immigrants, because there are thousands of American companies who hire them, and millions of Americans, including you and me and the audience, who benefit from their work. So I think we have the right and the responsibility to treat them much better than the way they treat them in Mexico.
Let me just ask you really quickly. Will you just acknowledge the truth, and you're obviously a very rich person, and I'm around rich people a lot. Rich people in America disproportionately benefit from low-wage, low-skilled immigration in the form of household help, in the form of cheap labor. Let's be totally honest. The middle of the country doesn't benefit a lot from this. It lowers wages. They don't hire a lot of household help. And there is a lot of crime, whether you're willing to admit it or not. So why are they bigots for...
No, there's not a lot of crime, because...
Look, you don't actually know about, so let's just pretend that I didn't say that, because it's a stupid argument.
Donald Trump is the king of fake news when it comes to undocumented immigrants.
I've heard the talking points. But let me just get back to the economics of it. It doesn't actually help an American citizen born here making 40 grand a year to have a bunch of people willing to work for 25 grand a year move into his town. Will you concede that?
No. There's a minimum impact on... No, you can laugh if you want, but that's not the truth. Because you're laughing, that doesn't mean it's the truth. Check the National Academy of Sciences. There's an immigration surplus. Overall, immigrants contribute much more to the economy than what they take away in education and social services. Those are the facts. Some people might be affected, but overall, which is what we care about, overall, they have a positive impact.
Okay. Jorge Ramos, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, the GOP's Obamacare replacement is already in trouble. Up next, we'll ask House Speaker Paul Ryan whether it will become law. Well, 7 years after Obamacare passed, Washington is once again at war over health care. The war isn't simply one between Democrats and Republicans, but instead between different factions of the Republican majority in the Congress. We'll talk to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, in just a minute. But first, take a look at what's been happening here in Washington.
This is what the American people have asked for. This is what those across this country have wanted. And we have been willing to listen, and now we will lead.
Right now, where it is, it's not what we told the voters we were going to do, and I don't think it's going to bring down the cost of insurance, which has got to be our goal.
This is the conservative alternative to Obamacare. This is how we're going to reform health care in America and give choice back to people, rescue the failing individual market. We're proud of this piece of legislation.
What's been introduced in the House in the last 24 hours is not the Obamacare replacement plan, not the Obamacare repeal plan we've been hoping for. This is instead a step in the wrong direction.
Well, the Speaker of the House may have his work cut out for him. The American Health Care Act, his bid for replacing Obamacare, is getting blasted by some of the conservatives whose support he may need to pass it. The House Freedom Caucus says it is, quote, Obamacare light. The Heritage Foundation says the bill misses the mark. Several Republican senators say they are unimpressed. What exactly is going on? Speaker of the House Paul Ryan joins us now with an update on all this. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet, Tucker. Good to be with you.
So it's been 7 years to the month since Obamacare passed. And I guess the obvious question is, why in all that time couldn't Republicans formulate a plan most of them agreed on before going public with it? It looks instead like chaos. Why is that?
Well, actually, I don't think it really is chaos. I heard your lead-in and heard what you said, but yeah. Here's what we did a year ago. A year ago, House Republicans said we need to take a plan to repeal and replace Obamacare to the country. We spent a year working on this plan. All House Republicans participated in this. We had these working groups where anybody who had an idea brought it to the table.
Right.
And then we reached consensus as conservatives, as Republicans, on what that plan looked like. We called it a better way. We put it on the internet. We all ran for Congress in 2016 on that plan.
I remember.
It was modeled on the Tom Price legislation. That's what this is. This is the legislative text of that plan that we ran in 2016 on what we would replace Obamacare with. Tom Price, who's now the Secretary of HHS, was the architect of it. 12 Freedom Caucus members were the co-sponsor of that bill as recently as December. So we are going through what I would call the sort of typical growing pains from being an opposition party fighting Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid to a governing party. And now we're translating that legislation, that plan, into a bill. Look, I'm really excited. Here's why I'm excited.
Wait, may I just ask you just really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you rolled it out yesterday. You said you've been working on this for a year with some, with precise terms and everything. When you rolled out, you must have known that lots of members of the Freedom Caucus and the Heritage Foundation and a bunch of Republican senators were going to start barking about it. Why not wait until everyone's on board with the version before rolling it out?
Well, like I said, all these folks helped pass this. We campaigned on this last year.
Right.
We did talk with all of these people. What I think is happening is people are getting a little confused about what you can and cannot put in what we call a reconciliation bill.
Right.
So I'm getting a little technical here.
No, I understand.
But there's 3 phases here, and that's what a lot of outside groups and folks just don't understand, the fact that if we put everything in the bill we possibly want, we would have a filibuster. We wouldn't be able to pass it in the Senate. So this bill, which is the first phase of a 3-phase plan, is what we can pass without a filibuster in a budget bill. There are things like interstate shopping and health care, association of health plans that let people bulk buy their health insurance nationwide through buying pools, medical liability reform, all those things we very much believe in, which is part of our Better Way agenda. You cannot put in a budget bill because then they can filibuster that entire bill.
I understand, and tort reform and lots of other things. And I don't want to keep pressing you on this because you know as well as I. But these are members of Congress, so they know that. They know what a reconciliation bill is.
Well, we're finding that some don't. So what we're having here is we're passing this first installment, which is to gut Obamacare, repeal the mandates, repeal the taxes, repeal the spending. Then we replace it with conservative Republican tax policy that has been long-standing conservative reform. Health savings accounts. Tax credits go by what you want to buy in state-regulated marketplaces, not federal, and risk pools. This is something that conservatives through the Heritage Foundation, through AEI, have been pushing for years. And then the other pieces that we really believe in, Tom Price in phase 2 deregulates the marketplace. There are 1,442 provisions in Obamacare that says the secretary has discretion. Tom Price is going to use that discretion to unwind Obamacare. And then phase 3, pass those other bills we very much believe in, like shopping across state lines, like medical liability reform. Right. Those things will pass here in the House because it only takes a majority. We're going to send it to the Senate. We're going to put pressure on the Senate to pass it, but they can't filibuster that.
Okay, so
here's the problem right here, Tucker.
Okay.
It took me like 7 sentences to explain all of that, and it's that confusion that I think is surrounding this issue. But the point here is we are keeping our promises. We're excited about this. We're taking one entitlement, we're defederalizing it, and we're capping it. The other entitlement, we're repealing it and replacing it with Republican conservative tax policy. This is nothing but a win for conservatives.
Well, okay, so let's get to the tax policy. So as I understand it, and I'm just reading this, so I may have it wrong, but there's an investment tax in here, the net investment income tax. And as far as I know, it only kicks in on couples making over $250,000 a year. So it's a tax on wealthy investors, and you're eliminating it. In a healthcare
3.8% tax. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So I guess my question is, looking at the last election, was the message of that election really, we need to help investors? I mean, the Dow is over 20,000. Are they really the group that needs the help?
This was a tax on capital income, which is bad for economic growth. It's basically a capital gains tax increase, effectively, to finance Obamacare. We're undoing Obamacare, so we're not going to keep Obamacare taxes in place. So all of these taxes, $1 trillion tax cut that this bill represents, that is part of that $1 trillion tax increase that was in Obamacare to finance Obamacare.
No, I know, but
we're repealing. No, but we promised we would repeal the Obamacare taxes. This is one of the Obamacare taxes, so we're keeping our promise. And by the way, it's bad tax policy because it's bad for economic growth, and we're also repealing the Obamacare spending. So we're getting rid of its taxing, and we're getting rid of its spending, and this is us keeping our word. You may want to keep that 3.8% tax. We're not going to keep it because it was part of Obamacare.
Well, but lots of things are part of Obamacare that you just said a minute ago you're not doing anything about because you can't under
only
reconciliation.
Because of reconciliation.
You don't have to meet.
That's right.
That's right, but you just said that you don't have to meet every promise in this first round.
That's
and
right.
Yet, I guess it's a macro
but fiscal
question.
Policy we can meet, but tax and spending policy we can. So that's what we're doing.
But also, I mean, you have. The overview here is that all the wealth basically in the last 10 years is stuck to the top end. That's one of the reasons we've had all this political turmoil, as you know. And so kind of a hard sell to say, yeah, we're going to repeal Obamacare, but we're going to send more money to the people who've already gotten the richest over the last 10 years. I mean, that's what this does, no? I'm not a leftist. It's just that's true.
I'm not that concerned about it because we said we were going to repeal all the Obamacare taxes. This is one of the Obamacare taxes. The other point I'd say is this dramatically helps us toward tax reform. I know it gets a little wonky, but by getting rid of the Obamacare taxes, the next bill coming up this spring and summer is tax reform. And that means the new tax code that we're proposing, we put this in our Better Way plan too. It's a part of our blueprint. Go online and read that as well. That will not have to overcome those Obamacare taxes, meaning when we have a new replacement tax code to gut and replace this tax code, it won't have to also replace the Obamacare taxes. So by getting rid of all these taxes, we're lowering the revenue that is taken out of the American economy, out of families, out of businesses for the government, and we think that's really important.
So tell me, the individual mandate was the thing that most people dislike the most, I think, about Obamacare. Right. And I just want to make sure I understand this. So that's gone, but there's going to be a cost for late enrollment, and it's going to be, if I'm reading this right, 30% surcharge on the annual premium. So if a plan costs, say, $5,000 a year, that means you have to pay this an extra $1,500 a year to pay the penalty.
Yeah, so let me explain why that is.
So why wouldn't I just wait till I get sick to buy insurance?
No,
and how is that going to work?
That's the point. That's why we're tightening the enrollment period. We're having continuous coverage, and that's why Tom Price already put out a regulation saying we're not going to have an open enrollment period for a year. One of the reasons why Obamacare is collapsing and it's crashing and its prices are so high is because they had an open enrollment plan time for a year, which is exactly what you're saying is what is happening now. What we're trying to do is prevent that from happening so we can drop the price of health insurance. You can't just say to somebody, wait until you get sick, then buy the health care. If you do that, then the health care gets really expensive. That's what's happening now. This tightens that up so that we can drop the cost of health care, but gives people a do-over. Gives it, look, if you want to go from this plan to the next plan, by the way, in the employer market, they already have these rights. So what we're basically trying to do here, Tucker, is equalize the treatment and the fairness between people who get health care from jobs and people who don't. People who get health care from their work, they can move from plan to plan without any penalty. We want to just give people in the individual market, guys working $10, $15 an hour jobs that don't get health care at it, we want them to be able to be successful. We want them to be able to have the same kind of tax treatment everybody else gets so that they can get affordable care. This does that.
So what are you going to do about emergency Medicaid, which is a huge cost for the states? Billions a year are spent. It's 100% goes to to illegal aliens, as you know. Journal of the American Medical Association, 99% of this money goes to illegals, mostly to bear children at public expense in U.S. hospitals. And again, it's a big problem. Why isn't that defunded in this?
Well, again, we're looking at bird rule reconciliation issues. What we're trying to do is make sure that you
couldn't defund it under reconciliation?
Yeah, we've got a little issue with that, and we're working on that with the Senate. So, again, we've got these goofy Senate rules we got to work with. We can't do every single thing we want to. We would do all of these things if we could without getting a filibuster. But we don't want to jeopardize this bill and make it subject to a filibuster, which means we can't do anything. So that's why we're trying to do this, so that we conform to the Senate rules. But here's one more point I'd say. Because we're delegating, we're giving Medicaid back to the states. It's a massive amount of federalism. Then the border state governors can do that. The border state governors decide what happens with their Medicaid populations. We cap it. We stop the expansion. We grow it at a slower rate over time, which saves trillions in the out years, which is a massive amount of debt reduction. And that is what we're doing here, which is a huge, huge conservative step forward for entitlement reform as well.
More with Speaker of the House Paul Ryan ahead. We've wondered why Congress is heading home so often, really often, instead of doing the work they have on the Hill. We're going to ask him that in just a second. Stay tuned. Here now, the rest of our interview with Speaker of the House Paul Ryan. Here's the fun part. So, as you know, we're 47 days into the Trump administration, and really nothing's gone through the Congress. At this point, during the Obama administration 8 years ago, they passed all kinds of stuff.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
What are the big pieces of legislation that have moved through the Congress?
So the reason, and we have a 200-day plan, and we're right on schedule with it.
No, but I'm just saying, compared to Obama,
I'm getting
who got
there.
Big
just hang on a second.
Done. Okay.
So the first 2 months, we had this tool called the Congressional Review Act, which is time sensitive. You can only use it for so long. And what we're using is we're going back and getting Obama-era regulations and repealing those regulations, sending that bill to the Senate. We've done about 15 here in the House. Like the coal one. Remember the one where Donald Trump did that bill signing with the coal workers? That was one of these instances where we took an Obama regulation, we said we're rescinding it. They can't filibuster that in the Senate. But we only have 60 days to use this tool. So we consume the first 2 months going after Obama regulations that are job-killing regulations because they can't filibuster that. Then we're moving to Obamacare, which is where we are right now.
But how many pieces of legislation have been signed by the president into law?
Well, the Senate here. So these are really good questions. These are very good. Oh yeah, we got a few through. I went to one of the bill signings myself. The one with the coal workers is one of these cases. So we've got the Senate now. They have to approve Donald Trump's cabinet. Okay. They have to put 1,200 people through the Senate to populate the Trump government. And Chuck Schumer can burn up to 30 hours per person.
Right, I'm aware.
And so what we're doing is in between that, the Senate's working on these Congressional Review Act amendments, which are repealing Obamacare regulations. The point being, Tucker, is we are executing our plan exactly as we had planned it. We're going after Obama regulations. We're giving Donald Trump the people he needs to staff his government. And now we're on to Obamacare, repealing and replacing Obamacare. This is just phase one. Okay, Tom Price is out there working on phase two.
Here's what I don't understand.
Here's phase three comes after that.
I don't understand this. So this is the 115th Congress. I think you've been in session for less than half of that time. So in April, we checked. The House is in session for 8 days in April. There's a lot to do. Nothing meaningful really has been. I mean, you could say I went to a bill signing about coal, but there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been done that he promised, and it hasn't made its way through Congress. Not all your fault, obviously, but 8 days is not a lot of time to be working in an entire month. Why?
Actually, we're producing a lot here. I'm very excited about it. Actually, the real why is because how long it takes to pass things through the Senate. So we typically do like a 100-day plan. As you've heard, these 100 days. I sat down with Mitch McConnell, and we looked at the fact that they have to populate the Trump government with their employees, with their cabinet secretaries and assistant secretaries. And we made this a 200-day plan because we know the Democrats are doing everything to string out the clock, to delay and stall. And there are certain rules that they can use in the Senate to do that. So we have a 200-day plan.
But in the House, are they the reason you're only there for 8 days in April? What is the reason for that?
We want to talk to our constituents. We want to go listen to our constituents.
But we have a new administration that can't get anything through the Congress. Shouldn't you put all that on a hold and just say we're going to get this done? 8 days is not a lot, right?
I don't know off the top of my head if that's a correct stat or not.
I think that's correct.
Okay, well, I'll just take your word for it. The point is we're piling up so many things in the Senate that they're still working on getting these people approved. So let me just give you a sense of what we're planning for the first 200 days. Repealing and replacing Obamacare, the biggest entitlement reform in a generation. Okay. Overhauling the IRS tax code, rebuilding the military, doing infrastructure, repealing harmful regulations, repealing Dodd-Frank and the Choice Act, which would replace it. All of those things we're planning on doing just in 2017. What about how exciting this is for us?
What about funding the wall? Is that, are you going to?
That's part of it. That's part of this too. That's part of our appropriations process.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate your coming on.
Great.
You got
These
a
are
lot
good
to do.
questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thousands of people were marching today in cities across the country for women's rights, they said, and against President Trump. After the break, we'll talk to Shelby Steele. He says modern protest culture is defined by what he calls incoherence and lunacy rather than sensible, attainable political goals. That's up next. Well, there's a lot going on politically. Protests in the streets, people getting mad, saying radical things. What's it all about? The other day in the Wall Street Journal, there was a fascinating piece written by Shelby Steele. He's a writer. He's a fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and he explains what exactly is going on. He joins us tonight. Mr. Steele, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So it's hard to summarize this piece tonight, and I hope that all of our viewers will read it. But basically you say the aims of liberalism have changed from freedom, which was the traditional aim of liberal movements throughout the last century, to something very different. Moral authority, you say, is the new goal of liberalism. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, in the 60s, America, for the first time, had to face its sins, the sins of the past, the racism, the slavery, the sexism, and so forth, the militarism, and a very negative view of America came into being, and America was in need of moral authority to function as a legitimate society.
Right.
And this is where we evolved the liberalism that we still have today, which gives us a cover against that shame, a way to function in America and be, in a sense, above shameful America. Thus the sort of note of superiority in today's liberalism, this sort of moral superiority. We are the good. And regular, everyday Americans are still associated with that evil past and cannot be trusted. This, I think, has a lot to do with the vitriol in regard to Donald Trump.
Yes. So you say a lot of this turns on the question of white guilt, but it's not what you think it is. You say this: white guilt is not guilt over injustices suffered by others. It's the terror of being stigmatized with America's old bigotries, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. To be stigmatized with any of these is to be utterly stripped of moral authority and made into a pariah. That's what this is about.
Yes. And that problem of that was what was new in the 60s, is that other groups, outside groups, blacks, women, had the ability to stigmatize America as a racist or sexist society.
Right.
Enormous power in stigmatization. It is the primary power that I think liberalism has exercised over the last 50, 60 years. It can stigmatize you. If you do anything, political correctness is an outgrowth of this. If you do anything to violate that what they consider to be the good, then you are in effect ruined. You are isolated. You are marginalized.
Right.
This is what we again see on campuses today, pushing, of muscling people aside. There's no reasoning. It's all muscling, moral muscling.
So I'm reading your piece and I'm thinking, this doesn't sound like politics as I understand it, a debate over issues. This sounds like religion. This sounds like theology. This is a spiritual battle, at least, that one side is waging.
Yes, exactly. Yes, liberalism is not an ideology. It is an identity. People who think of themselves as liberals really are adhering to an identity, to the idea of my personal self. I am the kind of person who is above racism, who is above sexism. And if you take that position there that I don't like, then you are challenging not just my ideas, but you're challenging me as a human being with a particular identity. And that is why the passions, the ferocity of the left that we see today in the streets and elsewhere.
There's really no debating people on the basis of that, because you're not really talking about ideas or policies.
No, there's a complete shutdown of any honest intellectual exchange because you are not threatening my ideas, you are threatening me. And I don't have the patience to be reasonable and argue with you on the basis of reason.
Yeah.
I need to literally extinguish or annihilate you and your position. You see the anti-Trump sentiment in many ways. Annihilate him. There is nothing redeeming in this man.
Right.
And so forth.
Boy, you're seeing that.
And because liberalism is an identity.
Shelby Steele, one of the smartest pieces I've read in a long time.